All right, good morning. I'm Sara Flounders, and I know so many of the people who are gathered here today as anti-imperialist activists, organizers. I know you from my work in the UNAC and the International Action Center, as a contributing editor to Workers' World newspaper and in the Sanctions Kill campaign, and so many of you in defense committees and all kinds of past delegations and confrontations and street actions and all kinds of things. So this panel, and we probably won't have any room for Q&A, even if we all keep to our time limit, and we're going to have to do that. But this conference, really, and this panel is hopefully a vehicle for navigating uncharted waters. That's what we're in today. We're in a seismic shift. There's an awakening radicalization that's happening on a global scale. And imperialism is drowning in its own arrogance and overreach. And like a drowning person, it's desperately trying to stay afloat, use any measure, and more than willing to pull others down with them. Of all the developing crises, setbacks, and defeats confronting U.S. imperialism, and just think of the last 3 years, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, but it's the past 6 months in Gaza that is an upheaval beyond reckoning. It is an upheaval that's changing the world. And that's really what we want to look at. There's a global response. There's an identification with Gaza that confirms really the disintegrating position of U.S. imperialism and its one strategic ally, Israel. That's who they have in all of Western Asia. And Zionism, as a racist ideology of domination and colonialism, is being challenged. It's a global turning point. October 7th was a revolutionary breakthrough. That's how we should see it. It was a real changer. And the result is a world revolt. It's a world revolt against imperialism. When you see the millions, the billions who are in the streets, and we need to challenge ourselves and the movement here to defend the Palestinian resistance, to defend the right to resist, the right to liberation by any means necessary. That's what's at stake. This struggle is reshaping the world struggle, and the struggle in solidarity with the liberation of Palestine, it's part of the class struggle. It's a phenomenal breakthrough that's happening, even in organized labor here in the US regarding Palestine. When you look at the polls, when you look at the actions. Now, the Israeli war, and it is a war, it's all-out war against the Palestinians, couldn't last a day without US imperialism. And what's the result? Both Israel and the US have become pariah states. Not a moment too soon. They're exposed, they're hated, and it's becoming really a material factor on the world scale. It's a period to ally ourselves with the liberation struggles of the whole global South and to mobilize workers here toward that objective. Now, UNAC exists as a coalition opposing all US war. All regime change operations, all sanctions, they're all forms of imperialist war. It's what unites us. It's an essential unity right here in the center of the empire because the propaganda here is so intense. It confuses people, disorients them. They can support one struggle and be completely on the other side in another one. We got to move that all the time. Now, UNAC began as a coalition united around the most difficult issue. There were people who walked out of a conference a little more than a decade ago over the demand, end all U.S. aid to Israel. That was the dividing line, and a dividing line that has been a uniting line. But now, we're in a new day, because for the first time, a majority of the U.S. population, when you look at any of the polls, is with Palestine. They may not understand all the issues we're raising here today, but in their heart, in their sympathy, they're for Palestine. You can't go anywhere. You can't get a cup of coffee without, if you mention Palestine, if you're wearing a keffiyeh, you're wearing a scarf, you're wearing a button, that you don't get a response. So this is a big change. Now, in polls today, there's another interesting thing happening, even if it's among people who understand nothing at all, on Ukraine, about NATO, but nevertheless, they oppose more money for Ukraine, more money to NATO. Isn't that interesting? There is a breakthrough happening after 3 decades of NATO aggressive expansion, and it's been silent. And 2 years now and 2 months of NATO determination to impose regime change on Russia. Well, how did that go? Biden promised within weeks he would turn the ruble, the Russian ruble, into rubble. He would impose sanctions so extreme and all-pervasive. And the US and NATO demanded every other country in the world comply. That's not what happened. The global South, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, didn't comply. There have been tens of billions of dollars to prop up the fascist regime in Ukraine, and it's a total loss. The front lines are crumbling. So there are big changes happening that we need to really understand. US sanctions are no longer the all-powerful weapon. The dollar, the almighty dollar, is in decline. The ruble and the rupee and the Chinese yuan, they are now major currencies of trade. US sanctions had grown to 40 countries. So most extreme form is what is happening in Gaza, but it's their plan for every country. They want to starve down anyone who resists them. And now the sanctions are challenged by the growing influence of the global South, who are developing new communications, new trade. There's an expanding BRICS alliance. That should keep US imperialism up at night. And a Belt and Road development projects involving 140 countries. There are new ways of financing development that don't leave countries totally chained to the IMF and the World Bank, and their demands for privatization and handover of resources and cuts in essential subsidies. There's huge changes sweeping Africa, especially in the Sahel. Niger demanded French troops out, and just this week, US troops and that drone base out of Niger. That's enormous. And in Mali, and Burkina Faso, and Guinea, and now in Senegal, just this week. And there's an anti-colonial upheaval, a real upheaval. Now, who does the US feel is responsible for this ability to defy their demands? Who are they angriest at? Who do they say is the cause of all this? Now, they blame Iran, yes, they blame Russia, yes, but it's really focused on China. It is, and all the big guns are trained on China. It's the sanctions, it's the aircraft carriers, it's the new weapons to Taiwan. That's the new US strategic partner. What Israel is, that's what the US wants to do with Taiwan. They've made it a porcupine, as they call it, bristling with so many weapons. There's the charges of a genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Now, that's a charge that every Muslim country in the world has countered and denounced. It's interesting. They won't say genocide in Gaza, but they'll tell you there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang, and there's no Muslim country that accepts that. We could look at the arming and positioning in South Korea and Asia Pacific. U.S. economic dominance now is in the past, and its global position is past tense, but it is the largest military in history. And we have to take that capacity for unrestrained destruction very seriously, very seriously. And that's where the mass movement comes in. That is the only thing on a global scale. I'm going to try to wind up on this because we have a whole panel and we have some workshops right after this that really will be discussing this further. But how far is the U.S. willing to go to defend its deteriorating global position? We can see it when Israel is publicly bulldozing bodies in plain sight, bombing diplomatic and consular facilities, a desperate effort to pull Iran into the war, and the targeting of workers from relief organizations. Gaza confirms how far the U.S. is willing to go in its war, in its destruction, in its attempted starvation of a whole people. It's a new normalization in imperialist war. Israel is flaunting its ability to just break through every known line of international humanitarian law and get away with it because they have the U.S. at their back. And it's no different also as Ukrainian forces are bombing deeper into Russia and using proxies to hit a concert hall in Russia. It's U.S. efforts at destabilization everywhere in the world. They don't have to be an alternative. They just want to create destruction, division, war, everywhere they can. It's a sign of their desperation. We need to look at the really vicious, renewed, and more intense blockade of Cuba, harsher than any previous time, the deadly threats against Venezuela. Around the elections that are coming up, they have a whole game plan on how to disrupt. U.S. appears positioned to go into Haiti because they can't get any other country to take it on. And this imperialist alliance of the U.S. and Canada, the EU, and Britain, the whole NATO gang is increasingly exposed, unable to impose its will, to pay for it, to pay for endless war on every continent. They're willing to grab back every concession that the workers have won in the U.S. and in the imperialist countries. It's getting pretty brutal. It will get much worse. And this is, again, where we come in, making those links against the wars everywhere and the war happening right here. So we need unity against all U.S. wars. We need to have a global view. We need to know that imperialism is a threat to humanity, that unity and resistance is our message, that the power is in the people. And when we look at the port closures and the street closings and the sit-ins and the shutdowns, we need to support the resistance right here. It may take a more radical turn. That's important to know. And we have to not break with the militants who are just learning that the power is in the people, just learning what it takes to organize a shutdown, a breakthrough, a sit-in. These actions, because that's power, it's being criminalized in Gaza, it's being criminalized here in all kinds of firings and doxings and site closings and arrests. And we need to applaud and support those who are in the front line of this battle, not break with the militants, support and understand them, not say, oh, this is too far, this is not what we planned. No, we need to know it's a new form of power emerging right here. It will be through many experiences. We need to be with it at every possible event and day and applaud and support those who are in this battle. That's people power. People power. The power is in the people, and we say power to the people. And join me in saying people power. People power. People power.